The last two dishes were a culinary disaster. The damned dozen by this point would need to do better if they were to solve the distortion without killing him. After fighting off more head chickens, Don Quixote asked, "What foul trickery was that? The owner didn't even touch the dish that she made, and the number went down." Dante told her that. He said that it's not even worth evaluating, since what she said of it scared away his appetite. Embrace the moment, Ryoshu. You're not the Queen of Cordon Bleu. Gregor suspected that the owner's version of the statement was shorter. Don Quixote demanded that he revoke his rejection. Dante then told them to hold it. Then they asked them, have any of them even tasted it? Yi-Sang, Gregor, Heathcliff, and Don Quixote were silent at this. Dante was not pleased by this, as they can't just feed others that they haven't tried themselves. They're trying to please someone. Heathcliff was annoyed by this, as they had a point, asking who wants to try that. The tension was thicker than it would be if they were preparing for battle. Yi-Sang basically told them, "Don't look at me." Don Quixote volunteered, as this was her dish, although she was still hesitant. Heathcliff grew impatient and told someone to get it in their jaw. So he grabbed a lump of this dish and shoved it down the nearest mouth, which turned out to be Missile, who was expressionless during this. Dante worrying that they've killed him, and not just because they'd need to bring him back, if that was the case. Don Quixote then basically said, "If Virgilius asks who was responsible, I had nothing to do with this time." Don Quixote, you're the one who made that dish! Even if Heathcliff was force-feeding it into that former N-Corp employee. Missile turned to Heathcliff very slowly and said, Heathcliff asked, what? He then went on to say, "The dressing is erroneous overall. Failure to properly cook the chicken has resulted in a residual stench of blood and other unpleasant odors. The sauce is too thick to bring out a deep flavor. The inconsistent cuts of the meat contribute to the serving's inability to rouse one's appetite." Heathcliff was confused, questioning his sanity, asking what he had to say. "Hey, don't blame him for your low vocabulary." Missile hasn't even finished yet. "The seasoning and spices are a complete disaster, and the taste in my mouth is even worse than plaster. Lacking sugar, you toss 2.5 spoonfuls of butter, and the end result simply belongs in the gutter." Roughly translated, the dish is utter. You can't even cook the chicken properly. As for what you put in it and on it, I get better flavor from building supplies. Gregor he could cook better than this, and his cooking was criticized by tasting like it came out of the dumpster outside. Don Quixote apologized for subjecting him to that. Missile then criticized Yi-Sang for aiming to prong his teeth and prong his tongue by cooking wrong. The headstrong lens of that plate, which has ding-dong notions of what food is to him. Yi-Sang had no excuse for this. Heathcliff didn't know what he was talking about. Miss Salt basically said that most are unable to accept his point when he gave detailed statements. It's why he usually gets to the point as briefly as possible. Before he could continue, Hong Lu suggested that Miss Salt take charge of the cooking. This was widely applauded. Hong Lu told him that they'd help him with everything he needed, even though Miss Salt would prefer not to have assistants around, especially considering how inept some of them are. Don Quixote vowed not to disappoint him. Miss Salt told them that cooking was not his speciality, but he shall readily attempt it. Seriously, this is a French stereotype. Do they expect someone that sounds French to automatically be good at cooking? It's like looking at Germany and expecting someone from there to have a strong tolerance to drinking ridiculous amounts of alcohol. Project Moon, why? As for Ryushu's team, Sinclair was nervous. He asked how in the wing's names is he supposed to make food that's both salty and clean, sweet but not too sugary, and lightly cooked, but somehow also crispy. That's expecting too much from a novice cook at best. He threw his apron on the floor, not able to do this anymore. Seeing arm wrestling with Heathcliff as easier than that, just as Ishmael said, even though she said that as a joke. Faust agreed, as it's as likely as Sinclair's height increasing by 5 centimeters in 1 week. Nigh impossible. Sinclair then basically shouted out, "You get the idea!" Ortiz saw this as weak. A few criticisms made him whine like the pathetic soldier that he is. Then Sinclair told her that if she's so sure of herself, why doesn't she do it herself? She accepted his challenge, putting on the chef hat and taking charge of that team. Miss Salt did the same on his team. He directed each of them to their given tasks. Don Quixote carving a potato in the shape of a star. Miss Salt instructing her to cut them into square pieces, so that they may be evenly cooked on all sides. So parmentier potatoes. Even though she tried to argue and was proud of what she did. He insisted on square shapes, 5 centimeters. Dante noted that he fit the role better, looking more charismatic than ever, while Gregor believed that a chicken was a chicken and can't be done any better, not even knowing what the lost recipe was. It might just be 1 spoon of earnestness and 3 scoops of effort. Hong Lu was amazed by learning how to cook potatoes. Heathcliff was amused by Hong Lu believing that big potatoes were harvested out in the fields. Hong Lu thought that he was taking him for a fool, mentioning that ripe potatoes fell from trees when the time was right. No, Hong Lu, that's apples. Heathcliff was annoyed by Hong Lu's ignorance, but it turned out that he was messing with Heathcliff. Then he noted that Heathcliff was picking up the meat tenderines. He was threatening him with it. Yi Sang was preoccupied with the serene flower that was blossoming on that yam. A bud can indeed bloom, even upon barren ground. Miss Salt identified this as a poisonous potato and ordered Don Quixote to confiscate it, a task that she was eager to do. Yi Sang asked them not to, seeing bird things as significant in their own ways. Seeing birds as an imaginary concept defined by humans when the essence of an object as being unchanged. Miss Salt seeing birds as the condition of food, discolored beyond a certain degree and produces an acrid smell after prolonged exposure to heat. Seeing this as burnt to the core, seeing discarding it as the best course of action as consuming that can negatively impact the body. Yi Sang saw it as, regrettable. Yeah, embrace the moment, Gregor. You're no longer the king of Cordon Bleu. Dante noted, while Miss Salt was ruthless as a chef, Yi Sang was mostly unhelpful. Heathcliff, on the other hand, was peeling potatoes at a surprisingly brisk pace, telling them not to talk, as it would ruin his focus. Apparently he was able to peel any potato with nothing more than a metal spoon, so having knives was a luxury. Sorry, do they not have vegetable peelers in that kitchen? Something to peel potatoes more safely? Miss Salt saw this as possible, seeing his expertise and his strengths. Heathcliff seemed quite pleased with this praise. Meanwhile, on Team Otis was ordering a wide variety of ingredients to be employed, telling him not to be picky eater. Being a picky eater apparently is what stunted his growth. This annoyed Sinclair, saying that he can still get taller from there. She also criticised Faust, saying that an unbalanced diet was what turned her hair grey. She protested that she's always had grey hair, seeing Ishmael's hands as coarse and rough for the same reason. Ishmael took offence to that, as this was due to the work she did aboard that ship she was on. Then Roger asked for her diagnosis. Otis told her not to yell frivolously. She's becoming a distraction. They both then prepared their dishes. After they were done, Dante reminded them that they have 2 chances left, starting with Miss Salt's, which was prepared with pinpoint precision despite Yi Sang's efforts, which looks like a cookbook illustration. Dante saw it as something worth serving. The owner savoured it, contemplating it for a while. Dante translating for him that he had to ruminate on that dish for a long time. It was an excellent serving in all tangible ways. The smell, the taste, the presentation. Yet, it was still missing something that couldn't be described with words, and that was professionalism as a cook. Almost perfection. Then the counter lowered to 1 of 5 chances, adding that it was why it couldn't pass, unfortunately. And Ishmael noted that he sounded like a posh judge. Wanting to remove the mask off the blighter's head is what Heathcliff wants to do, seeing as the only thing that he believed was distorted was his crooked imagination. Miss Salt said, "Le bravo vengo," or "I admit defeat." He had no regrets over that battle. Dante was relieved that the chickens weren't attacking this time. Then Otis brought her dish. It was neat, not too fancy, simple and clean, although Dante asked what the needles were for, looking like clock hands. She considered it a simple decoration that was a tribute to Dante. This almost made Dante add bonus points, much to Ishmael's annoyance. Then the owner made a comment that was too sensational for words. Then we saw the memory of the owner's mother criticizing her son for being a mess and having that freaky mask on his head, as she had to grin and bear with all kinds of nonsense. How was he going to live through that unforgiving world if he got heartbroken over something so small? Telling him to get it together already. Yeah, it's clear that mental health has a stigma in that society, even though it's a few centuries ahead of ours in time. I see. The owner noted that his mother was always like that. scolding him with nitpicky lectures rather than giving him kind and caring words. Honestly, I'm amazed that he didn't snap and kill her, as that kind of treatment is how serial killers are made. Apparently she was particular about chicken, rarely touching a piece that anyone else would take. He had forgotten something important while running that restaurant. Dante noted that it was their chance, as the distortion was weakening with him, and Sinclair noted that a door had appeared next to him, asking if they should go through it. Roger asking what made Urtis' dish stand out. Urtis didn't seem to care, only caring to see the end of this. Well, I suspect that it was because Miss Salt's dish was just too good. Regardless, Team Urtis won. They entered this dungeon and encountered familiar battles and gained Ijo gifts based around fried chicken, and also what's used to prepare it, or even go with it. When they got to the end of this dungeon, it was based on the owner's mind. They'd arrived at a version of the restaurant when it was still successful. Dante saw it as visions that they've not seen before, the owner's memories. Then we see the manager of Bodhisattva Chicken finding the top secret recipe that wasn't locked up securely. In fact, he was using it as a rivet to eat ramen. The owner, as a human, saw that he had the recipe, asking how he got his hands on it. Apparently, he sent a spy. The part-timer that came an hour early with prep on minimum wage. I mean, that should have been suspicious to him, because if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Certainly if they're putting in more effort than they should be. It's understandable to be suspicious, and yet he wasn't. The owner asked why. Apparently it was out of fear. The manager of Bodhisattva Chicken needed to meet the quota that K-Corp HQ demanded from him. Otherwise, his restaurant would be shut down. The recipe was still in the owner's head. 2 spoonfuls of sugar, 1.5 spoons of soy sauce, then add minced garlic. But the manager fought ahead with that, and decided to burn that recipe burn it in a concept incinerator. Then any trace of that recipe would be gone, including the memories in his head. The owner despairs, and desperately tries to keep the recipe in his head. Apparently the manager of Bodhisattva Chicken tried threats at first to get him to shut down his restaurant. Then at that point, he was unable to remember the recipe. Then the restaurant shifted to what it was in the present. Ryoshu never liked that pest, knowing that he was rotten from all the no smoking on premises signs plastered over his walls. Yes, that's what the acronym NSOP means. Yeah, I don't think not allowing the use of death sticks in his restaurant was the problem. It's other things that made him rotten. Ishmael seeing the recipe is as good as gone if it was put in the concept incinerator. Gregor didn't know what that was, but he knew based on her face he doesn't want to know. Before Ishmael could respond, Yi Sang explained that the concept incinerator is a trusted method of permanently erasing a technology, such as making it as if Faust never invented Mephistopheles. Honglu asks if it turns things back in time. Yi Sang says no, it's oblivionized, as if the brain had never conceived it. He confirms what I said earlier. Any documentation, photographs, any trace of its composition, even Faust's own memories, would be dimmed and obliterated. The concept incinerator. I've been talking with someone about this, and This person, which I shall leave nameless, largely because they don't want to be identified in this, has suspected that this might be O-Corp singularity, O possibly standing for oblivion, as in what happens to that which is burned in this singularity, if it is a singularity. As for what it does, it's implied that if the original recipe was thrown into this, it would surgically remove it from existence, every memory of it, every physical trace of the recipe's existence dispersed. It'd be as if it was never made. I doubt that it would work that well on people, where burning someone inside this would erase all memory that this person ever existed. If that was the case, could they have cloned themselves and willingly sacrificed themselves to start with a clean slate, free from reprisals from fixers, syndicates, and even wings? No, I highly doubt that would work. It's more for technologies or anything that others see as a threat to their business. And Faust added that the effectiveness and range of the incineration depends on the price of the product. Then the owner admitted that he can't tell if the marinade was based on pepper or soy sauce, how much sugar or salt he should use. Nothing is left. None of his customers would remember how it tasted. He sees it all. He sees it all as useless. Ortiz saw him as too soft-hearted, telling him to do away with the tacky name that he chose for this restaurant and give it a better title. It turns out that this was his mother's name. Yes, that's what, or rather who, Yubong was. Sinclair felt awkward. Ryusho said TWH, possibly meaning towards wider halves, although I'm not sure about that one. What do you think? Ortiz regretting her bad taste, but his weak will remained. Dante questioned why she's so eager to start fights, but Ortiz ignored him and decided to fix his helpless attitude. Then they fought Papa Boingy, who was stronger than he was during their last fight with him. He was aided by more head chickens, but eventually he was able to have some sense knocked into him. The owner remembered that he had forgotten something important. Running that chicken joint. The chicken he wanted to cook was something that even his mother could enjoy. Something to please her extremely particular palate. He knew all along why she wouldn't eat chicken. Apparently it was because they couldn't afford to feed the whole family. It was because they had a stash of coupons, where 10 of them could be exchanged for a free chicken. She would keep collecting them for him, to feed the chicken that she wouldn't eat. There was also pizza coupons, and then he remembered that she gave him the chicken because she liked pizza better. Realizing this reverted the owner to human. He felt his head pounding, though. Dante noting this. Ortiz, well, she saw this as a sound plan, the carrot and stick approach, an effective tactic often employed in military operations. Ishmael didn't see this as any different from her usual brawling out and striking first. Ortiz saw this as subtle by her standards, seeing him as catching the hint and following well, choosing her words carefully. Sinclair thanked her. Dante asked Ortiz if she almost called him a rookie, knowing that the owner wouldn't understand this. As for the owner, he could start anew thanks to them, as it didn't matter what recipe he used, as long as he cooked from the heart for those he cared about, even if it's in the shape of a pizza, which apparently was what Ortiz made, the customer would appreciate this. Heathcliff asked what he had, as his rival offered a lifetime voucher for free chicken. Roger complaining about how stuffing that Well, she could be stuffing her face with drumsticks of countless flavors by now. The owner handed them something, a wrapped-up box, calling it an invaluable treasure. There's nothing like that. Don Quixote asking, could they accept such a rarity from him? It was because without their help, he couldn't reopen his restaurant, insisting that they take it. When they got back to Mephistopheles, it was sunset, and Don Quixote gave her account about how they resolved the distortion and claimed the spoils. Virgilius was silent, and no, Don Quixote, it was not because of the glory of your tale. It was because he tuned out at the point when she said, we then embarked to you mongs. Don Quixote complained that he didn't hear a word. Virgilius didn't want to hear her embellished drivel, as Faust's report filled him in on all the details needed. Roger told her to ignore him and open the box, wanting to know what was inside. It turned out to be Bongi, a doll of the mascot. He wanted to use that one day, but he gave it as a gift of gratitude. Roger didn't understand, not believing that was it, asking if he hid something in the plush's belly. Dante noting that he didn't seem to be the kind of person that did that. Gregor believing that he was trying to get rid of it, and they were there to take it. Heathcliff wanting to toss it in the concinerator, possibly meaning the concept incinerator, but then a hand gently tugged at the doll that he grabbed, or rather gripped with ferocious rage. It was Charon's hand. Heathcliff asked what was there to like about it. She mentioned that it had eyes and nothing else, seeing it as nice. Virgilius said that she could keep the doll. Missot seeing it as an incorrect statement, as the doll has a torso and limbs. The chicken plush was what they had instead of free food for life, which had earned its seat on the bus, with Heathcliff likely wishing that he had smashed that owner's skull in when he had the chance. Meanwhile, Samjo talked to Chief Dong Rang that the distortion was resolved. He was witness to it, mentioning that they seemed unreliable at first, Limbus Company, I mean, but it's okay to speak with them, agreeing to bring them over. Then the manager of Bodhisattva Chicken was contacted by Samjo, who disliked sentences that lacked a subject. The manager feared that once that restaurant reopens, the customers gained would be lost, the quota would be missed. Samjo basically said, don't blame me for not looking for a way to make it work. The moment that the stolen recipe was in the concept incinerator, asking if he's heard of the saying, if you rob a house, make sure the homeowner never realizes it. This was something lost on that manager, and Samjo mentioned that he just made that up, to remember it well next time, telling him that he'll see him around, ominously saying that he has visitors that need greeting, being dragged into a mess of unprecedented scale. It would appear that after N-Corp had been dealt with, K-Corp now has an interest in Limbus Company. And this mission involving the distortion was likely a test to make sure that they were capable of doing something more in the future. It was also implied that competitive sports were played in the city, at least within District 14, as Samjo mentioned that he once aspired to be a professional baseball player. It makes me think that there might be other competitive sports in the city. Something that's actually rational in that universe, as opposed to death sports that remind me of the Running Man. This chapter, or side story, depending on how you see it, also showed that the Wings or at least those pressured by fear by them of losing their place of employment, aren't above using subterfuge to destroy competitors, certainly after threats fail. It's also revealed that the distortion isn't as widely known as we might think, and its cause would also not appear to be widely known, which is surprising as the library, what used to be Lobotomy Corporation HQ, was determined to be where it came from, where it happened sometime after the White Nights and Dark Days. As for this particular case, this is one time when Moses the Distortion Detective would be a worse fit for dealing with this, as I doubt she, Ezra, Uriah, or Vesper Crabrow have any culinary skill. As for the source material, it's to do with the Hell of the Flaming Cock. Yes, that's what it's called. It's basically a sub-hell, one of the 16 lesser hells depicted in the Hell Scroll, which you might think is connected to Ryoshi's background story, but this is separate from her story. Yes, a lesser hell of Naraka, which involves a flying, fire-breathing rooster or cockerel that chases those sent there, pecking at them and using their flame breath to burn them. Considering that this involves chicken, both the minions of this distortion and the distortion himself having a chicken head, there is that to connect this to the source material, that and the abnormality basilisoup, the source of the lifetime stew EGO, which burns those in front of it with scorching hot soup. Although this abnormality is based on a European folk story called Stone Soup. There are variations of this story, such as the French, Hungarian and Russian versions having the travellers being soldiers returning home. But the story in all versions involves someone tricking these travellers into adding ingredients into the stone soup, which is a stone in a pot of water. Once enough have added ingredients, the stone was removed, as they can't eat that, and everyone that contributed to this enjoyed the stew. Sinclair shared that idea of communal sharing the stew, while Don Quixote said something that was in the story. Yes, and at the end of chapter 3.5, I know there was some foreshadowing and, well, I'll get to that once we get to the chapter 4 lore section. I have a few other videos to go through before chapter 4 lore is covered. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!